So the long postponed The Flash solo movie has finally came and went. Yes, the final nail in the coffin that is the Snyderverse or any ties to it are seemingly over, with the exception of Aquaman. Apparently, if The Flash did really well at the box office, there was possible talks of a standalone sequel and keeping Ezra Miller as the Flash separate from James Gunn's new DC universe, in a similar fashion to what they're doing with Matt Reeves' Batman films. However, after an extremely disappointing lackluster opening weekend for The Flash, the subsequent severe drop in ticket sales in the following weekend, and the less than stellar reviews, it seems as if The Flash 2 will never happen. And to be honest, I'm not that angry about it. I was not a big fan of the film, and criminal activity aside, I'm not a fan of Ezra's Flash or his interpretation of Barry Allen. I'm not the biggest fan of Grant Gustin's interpretation either in the Flash TV show on the CW, though I think Gustin is far less irritating and reminds me much less of someone trying to do a bad Tom Holland Spider-Man impression. With all that being said, I think with the recent end of the DCEU, it would be fun, or maybe sad and depressing, to see the failure that is the DCEU. And although I think there's a fair share of more than bad MCU films, it is a testament to how they were able to maintain that level of momentum for over a decade. And now, let's take a look at The DCEU technically started back in 2013 with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel starring Henry Cavill as Superman, Michael Shannon as General Zod, and Amy Adams as Lois Lane. However, if we want to dig back a little further, the DCEU tried to really kick off their competition to Disney's MCU 2 years prior in 2011,
with the release of 2011's Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds as the Hal Jordan version of the character.
And while I'm personally a Jon Stewart guy myself, being a fan of the Justice League cartoon growing up, I don't think Hal Jordan is a bad choice. That aside, it's no surprise that this film wasn't received well at the time, and has since been literally used in other films as the punchline for jokes. While this film doesn't really have much to do with the Snyderverse or the DCEU following 2013's Man of Steel, I do think it's relevant to the overall theme of the issues with the DCEU going forward. As while this film isn't exactly the most critically acclaimed of superhero movies, it's not like Marvel had the perfect start as well. Sure, Iron Man was very well received, but The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 were not nearly as well liked as the first. Even the first Thor movie isn't some beloved film. The reviews are mostly positive, but nobody was really blown away by it. I'm not saying I wanted them to keep Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan, however, it's not like we haven't seen sequels to superhero films vastly improve over their predecessors. My personal favorite MCU film, and one that is still held in high regard amongst fans, is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, while First Avenger isn't a bad origin story, it does feel like half a good movie, and unfortunately after Cap rescues Bucky, the rest of the film, save for the ending, is a really boring slog that montages over the best parts. My point is they could have continued the franchise with a Green Lantern sequel, maybe have the following Superman or Batman film take place in this world. It wouldn't be completely unnatural to have Hal Jordan's Green Lantern be the first superhero in your cinematic universe. From there you can build on his animosity with Batman, his friendship with Barry Allen or Wally West Flash. Either way, moving on to the real start of the franchise is 2013's Man of Steel, the first solo Superman film since 2006's Superman Returns, starring Brendan Routh. And here is where you'll either continue watching or immediately dislike the video and write a hate comment. I am not a Zack Snyder fan, and I think he was the completely wrong choice to helm a Superman film, and honestly was the wrong choice to be the architect of this cinematic universe. I have three main reasons why he doesn't fit the role. The first is that he fundamentally doesn't like superhero comic books. He's on record as saying he never really liked comics and superheroes specifically because nobody was dying or having sex, which did make him the right director for something like Watchmen. Even if I personally felt he misunderstood the point of the graphic novel, either way, Watchmen is a critique of superheroes. It actively hates the idea of superheroes, and whereas most superhero comics view them as heroes, Watchmen critiques them as cowards who hide behind a mask. However, this makes him the complete wrong choice for a hero like Superman, the character who's a farm-raised alien from another planet who is literally described as the Boy Scout, the ideal superhero, a good heart, inspiring. And that's my second point, is that Snyder never really understood Superman. He tried making a darker, more brooding version of the character who barely smiles, but that's not Superman, that's Batman. Batman is the dark, edgy guy. Superman is the inherent good guy. And I know fans of Snyder's take on the character defend this decision as modernizing the character, but hope and inspiration isn't an outdated concept. I actually think in a modern day world of social media and so much inauthenticity in our society, that a superhero who is undoubtedly and unequivocally just a good person who wants to help could be very endearing. That was my issue with Man of Steel also killing Pa Kent. Even if the way that they killed him wasn't so illogical and silly, his death inspiring Clark to become a hero is just not Superman. Superman doesn't need another tragic origin story. He already has one. His entire home planet was destroyed. Everyone who is like him is gone or evil. He was sent to Earth as a baby, having lost his entire people, and raised on a world with a people that could never understand him. He doesn't become a hero because of a single tragedy, again like Batman does. He becomes a hero because, as Holland's Spider-Man said in Civil War, when you can do what you can do and then the bad things happen and you don't try to stop it, you're a part of the problem. And I probably butchered that quote, but I didn't really feel like looking it up to get it exact, but the message is there. Superman becomes a hero because he inherently knows he has gifts and wants to help people. Out of pure inspiration and hope, he just wants to help people. He is a hero through and through, the ideal superhero. My final reason Snyder shouldn't have been at the helm is because he's impatient. The equivalent to what the DCEU did in MCU terms would have been making the first Iron Man film, and then instead of getting more solo films to build up the universe and the characters, we then got an Iron Man vs. Captain America Civil War type film, and we not only introduce Captain America in this film, but we also throw in Thor, who just sort of shows up. And then at the end, Iron Man and Cap become friends, and then a big monster shows up, and now Iron Man sacrifices himself and dies. Sounds pretty rushed and not well thought out, right? You're goddamn right it does. But it goes even further. Instead of introducing and developing these characters over several films, Snyder got too ahead of himself and wanted to jump into Death of Superman, Dark Knight Returns, and Injustice storylines. I wonder why he chose those ones. Could it possibly be that all of those stories are partially famous for being known as darker and edgier stories? I don't know. I also find that immediately jumping to Superman Goes Evil as a storyline is just the most basic, generic, and boring route to take the character, especially doing it so soon. I mean, 2 films in and we're already getting glimpses of Superman being some authoritarian dictator. And this is before we even really know this character, because Man of Steel 1 definitely doesn't do a lot in making us care or understand Superman as a character. I also think that using Zod right off the bat and causing such massive large-scale destruction did the franchise a disservice. When you start at such a high level of destruction and carnage in your first film, you leave such an airy space in the following films, because somehow every following DCEU film never really matched Man of Steel's level of scale, making them feel smaller, and of course they are. It's hard to match the weight of 2 Kryptonians fighting in a large city. But that's the issue with Snyder. He gets too ahead of himself, jumping to the big famous storylines, but never wanting to do the legwork to develop the characters and get us to invest in them emotionally. He'd rather show a cool shot of Superman hovering over people standing on rooftops as a flood occurs instead of showing him saving people, comforting them, being a hero, because the stylistic cool shot is apparently more important. But my issues with Man of Steel aside, the film wasn't completely hated. Now, I'm certain that Warner Bros. And DC wanted a more, well, successful first film in their cinematic universe. As previously mentioned earlier, the MCU did kick off a lot stronger with Iron Man, which was and still is a very well-regarded film, even from non-MCU and non-superhero film fans. I think a part of that was it was before Marvel had kind of turned into a long-running comedy, and the quote-unquote formula hadn't really been done yet. Either way, though, you'd expect that they would take the feedback and criticisms that were received on the first film, hit the lab, come back stronger with a sequel. But here we are in 2023, 10 years later, and we never got a Man of Steel 2. Henry Cavill was never to don the cape in a solo film again, as the next film we received in the DCEU slate was Zack Snyder's 2016 Batman v Superman. Now, even as a young, spry, still hopeful 17-year-old, the idea of not giving Batman his own solo film before having him fight and interact with Superman seemed off. especially since in 2016 we were also getting Captain America Civil War, which had been developing its characters and their relationships since 2008. A full 8 years of solo films, 2 Avengers films, and building up the friendship and camaraderie between Iron Man and Captain America. So when they're beating the hell out of each other at the end of the film, they're not two strangers, just fighting because, but they're friends, warriors who have fought and bled together, family tearing each other apart. However, I thought maybe the idea could be interesting. I actually think the idea of taking the destruction that was caused in Man of Steel between Zod and Superman and having Bruce Wayne be in Metropolis when this happened was a really cool idea, seeing the absolute chaos and carnage caused by these two aliens. I think it does instill a natural fear in Batman, a motive that is completely understandable and easy to get behind. Even though it did feel a little rushed, I wasn't completely ready to give up, and I was willing to give it a shot. And then I left the theater and was absolutely bewildered how a film featuring Batman and Superman fighting each other could be so dreary, uneventful, and boring. The craziest part is there's also like 6 different plots happening at once in this film, and none of them flow into each other nicely. None of them feel as if they connect to an overall larger plot. Not to mention, on top of this only being the second time we're ever meeting Clark's Superman and Amy Adams' Lois Lane, we also are introduced to an older, hardened Bruce Wayne, with clearly having a lot happened in his past. We also get introduced to Wonder Woman, Lex Luthor, well, I guess that was Lex Luthor. We get a Ninja Turtle Frankenstein version of Doomsday, and not to mention that, but we're also introduced to Cyborg, Aquaman, and The Flash in, and if you haven't seen the films and you guessed emails, you're correct. Yep, that's right, we learn about half the Justice League through emails. For a guy who prides himself on making everything epic and cool and cinematic, revealing 3 crucial Justice League members by having Batman open emails is just the lamest thing I've ever heard. And Wonder Woman feels so shoehorned into this movie at times that it's baffling. It feels like every scene she's in was added in the 4th or 5th draft of the screenplay. She never feels like she fits in any scene she's in, and it's just so distracting. Again, the biggest problem is just the overwhelming amount of subplots going on. You have Clark all sad because the public hates him, you have this conspiracy to frame Superman for being a murderer, even though why would anyone believe a flying alien with super strength and laser beam eyes would use a gun? You have Batman and Wonder Woman trying to figure out who the other is, you have Batman and Superman trying to figure out who each other is, you have Batman trying to figure out how to hurt a Kryptonian, you have Lex Luthor trying to pit Batman and Superman against each other because, well, Lex is evil, so yeah, I guess that's why. Now, if you're wondering if I've seen the 3-hour Ultimate Cut, unfortunately, yes, I have. No, I don't like it more. Adding 30 minutes may have fixed up some of the pacing and plot threads feeling unfinished or out of place. However, it also makes the movie 3 hours. And I'm sorry, but a movie with this plot does not need 3 hours when Infinity War juggles like 30 different characters and manages to be under 3 hours. To finish off this segment, I will say I liked some elements of BVS. For starters, I mentioned the concept of Batman's issue with Superman being a result of the destruction in Man of Steel. That works. The Batman warehouse fight scene is spectacular. It's the first time in film we'd really seen Batman fight like how you'd think Batman would. It felt very Arkham City-esque, and it was a great action scene all around. The actual fight between Superman and Batman, I liked it just fine. It was a little too short and missed the aesthetic and cinematic nature of the Dark Knight Returns animated film and comic, but it was a solid fight scene, and for the first time we see these two monolith characters fight in live action, so it was cool to see. But again, unfortunately, the film is bogged down and hindered by an overabundance of side characters and endless side plots, with no narrative clarity and focus. Even with the poor reviews, I still thought this universe was salvageable, but if you're unaware, I bet you're asking what the next film was. Was it a solo Superman sequel? Maybe a solo Batman film dealing with the fallout from Superman's death? Did we get a solo Wonder Woman film to flesh her character out more? Maybe The Flash, Cyborg, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter? Well, no. The next film after the mess that was BVS is perhaps DC's biggest mess of a film, David Ayer's Suicide Squad. Now, I understand the Suicide Squad and Guardians of the Galaxy are two very different comic book teams. However, it did feel like DC was trying to capitalize on the success of 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy film, a team of misfit criminals coming together in a prison and becoming a team/family. Yes, I know there are differences, but in terms of marketability, it definitely felt like they were trying to cash in on the hype created by Guardians. Now, I don't even hate the idea of a Suicide Squad film. I've never been super keen on the whole evil team of criminals thing. However, the Suicide Squad gets around this by having them forced to do missions for Amanda Waller via explosive chips implanted in their heads. So I'm fine with the Suicide Squad as characters. I like Deadshot a lot, Captain Boomerang is a fine enough Flash villain, and I think Diablo could have been really cool had he been written just slightly better. I even think Enchantress is a cool character. I will say I'm not the biggest Harley Quinn fan, she's okay. I've just never understood the massive appeal of her character. Either way, the film itself. It's no surprise if there's one film that everyone can agree is bad, it seems to be this one. Man of Steel and Batman v Superman have a fair amount of supporters, most likely because Snyder does have some really die-hard fans, but it doesn't even seem like Snyder fans like this version of Suicide Squad. You can blame David Ayer, blame Warner Brothers, blame whoever you want, but nothing about this film works. It looks horrible, every single scene is overly dark, not tonally, literally every single scene is visually dark. The editing and pacing is one of the worst I've seen in not just blockbuster superhero films, but in films in general, and apparently Warner Brothers hired a trailer editing company to do the actual editing of this film, and whether it's true or not, it definitely does feel like it. Scenes sort of just happen in this film, like nothing really leads into another thing. It all just sort of happens. Things happen in this movie and you're just left perplexed because you feel as if whole scenes are missing from the story. Now, like the Justice League film, there's apparently a director's cut version of this film that's more detailed and also explores Jared Leto's Joker a lot more, which again, Jared Leto's Joker seems to be one aspect that's universally disliked about the DCEU. Even the most diehard of Snyderverse fans, the ones posting #restore the Snyderverse on every single comic or DC related page, are not a fan of this Joker. However, unlike Snyder's Justice League cut, which we received on HBO Max, we will most likely never see this version, so there's no sense in talking about it too much. I do feel bad for Ayer and even Snyder, as it seems the studio played a large part in these films feeling so disjointed and scattered. I mean, not to bring up Marvel again, and it won't be the last time, but the first Guardians film came after 6 years of developing the universe. We got to see solo films building up the Avengers, having them team up, bringing in a cosmic threat with Loki and the army of Chitauri, and then we got the team of space criminals teaming up. Let me paint a hypothetical. How much better would Suicide Squad have been if Harley Quinn and Deadshot were caught and sentenced to Arkham Asylum by Batman in solo Batman films? Imagine if we had 2 or 3 Batman films already in this universe, and in those films at some point, Batman catches these people and locks them up. You can even do the same with Killer Croc, have a solo film where the villains are Barry's rogue gallery and Captain Boomerang is caught and imprisoned, putting him in Arkham. I'm just saying, if you want to separate your film from Marvel and make it feel different, maybe build up this team of criminals in prior films, then have them team up in a Suicide Squad movie. Then maybe their character arcs and that bar scene won't feel so rushed and unearned. Another example of, unfortunately, DC trying to rush this cinematic universe. And the worst part is, had they just taken their time, they could have easily capitalized on Marvel kind of faltering in Phase 4. Just as Marvel is starting to slip, DC could just be popping off. They'd probably be on Justice League 2 by now, or at least would be at the point where the large storylines feel more appropriate. Now time for the one Snyderverse related film that I actually like quite a bit, that being Patty Jenkins' 2017 film Wonder Woman, starring Gal Gadot and Chris Pine. This movie is actually pretty solid. It does feel a hair too similar to Captain America: The First Avenger, however, I thought there was a lot of good stuff in this movie, and I remember when it was released, DC fans were actually pretty excited, and it seemed as if there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. I don't think Wonder Woman is a perfect film, and there's plenty of superhero films I'd rather watch. However, it's fairly well shot, the action scenes are actually pretty good, especially the No Man's Land scene, and the writing is just a lot better than all the previous DCEU films. For starters, the plot feels cohesive for the first time. Scenes actually work in tandem with each other, building upon one another. You know, like how a movie is supposed to be made. The pacing is a lot better, and the look of the film, the color grading especially, has a lot of purpose and intent. See, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman just look gray and desaturated all the time. There's decent contrast, but it's so muted and lifeless in the colors. Whereas in Wonder Woman, when Diana is on Themyscira, the colors are vibrant, it's bright and colorful, like you'd expect the place where a race of Amazonian warriors would live. Then, when Diana and Steve Trevor, played by Chris Pine, head to London, and once they get to the war stuff, the color grading shifts to a more muted and grimmer look, to reflect the tone and setting of both London and war. It's almost as if the filmmakers and people behind the scenes had a reasoning behind the creative decisions. Diana is also way more likable and charming than both the Batman and Superman we've been introduced to. Sure, the fish out of water story has been done before, the entirety of the first Thor movie is pretty much that plot, however it really works with Diana Prince, and the World War I setting was actually pretty cool. It was a nice way to introduce Diana to our world by showing her how awful mankind can be, and breaking that little bubble she had known her entire life. The story is engaging. Gadot and Pine also have a lot of chemistry, and while I may not think that Gal Gadot is an amazing actress, I do think for what they needed from her in this movie, she works really well. She handles the wide-eyed, new-to-the-world sense of wonder adaptation of this Diana really, really well. Her line delivery and performance may not be amazing, but she's so charming as Wonder Woman that it's hard not to like her. And I don't know if she sells the commanding warrior aspect of the character, but she captures the heart of Wonder Woman, which is also very important. The film has one big problem though. Remember when I said Captain America: First Avenger was half a good movie, but also had a great ending? Well, Wonder Woman is 2/3 of a good movie with a really, really bad ending. See, the premise of the plot is Wonder Woman is looking for Ares, the god of war. Throughout the film, you assume it to be the general of the German army. Diana believes Ares is influencing mankind, and that's why the world war is happening. However, when she kills who she assumes to be Ares, the fighting continues and she realizes she was wrong. Then we get an absolutely amazing speech from Chris Pine, where it basically boils down to, hey, sometimes mankind is just bad and there's no rhyme or reason. And I think that's a really interesting and mature way to end your film, and for once it doesn't end with a big CGI fight, and then all of that is erased because it turns out a different character is Ares, and now we end the movie with a big CGI fight. I think they had such an opportunity to end this film with that strong message and that impactful moment, and not end it in the way that every single superhero movie ends. But they don't, and it really makes me not want to watch the movie ever again. Still, Wonder Woman is a fairly decent film, and a lot better than Man of Steel and Batman v Superman in my opinion. Just as a film, it's much better constructed and understands the character of Wonder Woman better than Snyder understood Batman or Superman. Finally, we've arrived, folks, 2017's Justice League. So if you don't know the long backstory behind this film, basically what happened was just 4 years after the release of Man of Steel, which kickstarted the DCEU, we were set to receive the first Justice League film, which 4 years isn't too bad of a turnaround since Marvel made Iron Man in 2008 and then released the Avengers in 2012. However, the film was plagued with behind-the-scenes issues both on set and off. For starters, Zack Snyder left the project before it was completed. Rumors had it that the studio was trying to force him out, but unfortunately he ended up stepping away after his daughter unfortunately committed suicide. And while I'm not a fan of him as a filmmaker, I cannot imagine the pain that he was and still is going through. He seems like a really nice person, and it's heartbreaking that he had to suffer that loss. Now, what happened in terms of the Justice League film was that the studio brought on Joss Whedon, who directed the first 2 Avengers films, to complete the rest of the movie and to do reshoots. They also completely changed the look of the film in post-production and changed massive story beats. What we got was a Frankenstein horror show of a movie, bits and pieces of Snyder's version and Whedon's version mended together to create a monstrosity of a film. This may even be worse than Suicide Squad in terms of things that feel like they don't fit together. At least Suicide Squad feels like one film made by one director, whereas Justice League is so evidently made by 2 different directors with vastly different styles and visions. While I do like the first Avengers film, Whedon was not the guy to bring onto this, mainly because his style and the way he handles his characters and dialogue is completely different than how Snyder does. So in this film, we get a Batman that doesn't act anything like the Batman we met in Batman v Superman, and the dialogue and the ways that the characters interact feels as if he took his script for the Avengers film and just changed the names to Batman, Flash, Aquaman, etc. You get the point. He tried taking the style of the first Avengers film and just taking the pre-established Snyderverse characters and plopping them into it. But we all know round pegs don't fit in square holes. Yet they tried. Oh, they tried. Obviously, the film was a disaster and was critically panned and did really poorly at the box office. And I didn't even mention the Henry Cavill mustache fiasco, which I feel like the entire internet already knows about, so you guys can look that up if you want more information on what happened with that whole fiasco. And honestly, I think this should have been the nail in the coffin. The absolute dumpster fire, colossal fuck up of these characters and this film should have been the indicator that they need to reboot this franchise. At this point, they were too far gone down the rabbit hole of mediocrity. But nevertheless, Snyderverse fans persisted, and in March of 2021, after years of petitions and hashtags, the Snyder Cut of Justice League was released to HBO Max. And I watched it with some friends. We made a little weekend out of it watching the BVS Ultimate Edition the night before, and yeah, this movie's better, but it's still not great. I think the term masterpiece gets thrown around a lot these days, especially on social media sites, but Snyderverse fans really like to use that word for this movie. And I just don't agree at all. For starters, it is way too long. There's no universe, no timeline, no world in which any superhero film or any film needs to be 4 hours long. You're telling me a film with characters named Batman and Superman, and where a giant gray bad guy who looks like a hammerhead shark is looking for something called the anti-life equation needs to be an hour longer than Avengers Endgame. A film that was the culmination and final act in a 3-phase, 11-year-long, 22-film saga. That said, a Zack Snyder staple, which is slow motion, is used so often in this film that it's kind of mind-boggling. I mean, I looked it up and apparently around 10% of this 4-hour-long film is slow motion. Literally a tenth of this movie is just a shot slowed down. Why? For what purpose? The film also still looks ugly as hell. I just don't think I like the way Snyder's films look. Not even the cinematography, just the color correction. Every one of his films looked like they turned the saturation down as low as they possibly could and then added a dirty water filter over it. Why? These are superheroes. They are bright and colorful. Why does it look like I'm about to watch a biopic or political drama? That being said, it does improve on a lot of the elements of what's been dubbed the Justice League version. The story is better, the characters are better handled, and the plot makes a lot more sense. But yeah, overall, of course it's going to feel more fleshed out and easier to follow. It's double the length of the original, and forgive the comparison, but Infinity War is under 2 hours and 40 minutes and manages to handle 20 plus different characters and doing so extremely well. So why do we need a 4-hour film where there's not even half that many characters? But for the sake of being fair, a lot of my issues personally with this film in terms of story is that I just don't care about any of the Justice League members. We're meeting most of them for the first time in this film and haven't even gotten a true solo Batman film. We've gotten 1.5 Superman movies, and he's also dead for most of this film. Outside of Wonder Woman, there's little attachment or emotional resonance with any of these characters. When the first Avengers film dropped, we had seen Tony Stark go from an arrogant billionaire who's selfish to a hero both in and outside of the armor over the course of 2 films. We see Steve Rogers become Captain America, rescue his friend and fellow soldiers, lose his best friend, and then sacrifice himself to save the world, only to wake up 70 years later and the world has passed him by and everyone he knows and loves is most likely dead. A man out of time. We see Thor learn humility and to be better than the arrogant boy swinging a hammer that he was at the start of the film. Throughout the first film, he learns what it means to be worthy. I'm just saying that it's hard to care about these Justice League members because even in this film, it's not about the characters learning or growing or changing. It's a rush to bring the League together to stop the Steppenwolf invasion. There wasn't a scenario in which I was going to love this film, because when you take away my attachment to these characters, all I'm gonna see is men and women in silly costumes fighting a big gray CGI villain and a bunch of CGI monsters. I will give credit where credit is due. I think there are some neat ideas in this film. I think the sequence where you show Darkseid invading Earth and the heroes and heroines of the time banding together to fight off his army was really cool. We see Amazonians, Atlanteans, Green Lantern Corps members, Greek gods, all coming together and fighting side by side. Not only is it just an awesome scene, but it adds a lot of depth and mythos to this cinematic universe, which I think is really neat. I also think the Flash running back in time scene is really, really cool. Quite possibly the coolest scene in the entire DCEU. There's nothing more to it. It's just a really awesome cinematic superhero scene. Seeing the Justice League fail, literally fail and lose, and Barry notices at the last second running as fast as he can, breaking the barrier of time and space and traveling back before Steppenwolf wins was really, really cool, and I can't even deny it. Is it a little bit of a crutch to pull that kind of scene? Yes, but if Marvel is allowed to kill half the universe and then bring them back a film later, I don't know. It works for me. I am glad they got rid of some cringe dialogue as well. The line about brunch that Barry has in the Justice League version of the film is just one of the worst things I've ever heard. However, there is no fixing this line delivery no matter how many times you edit this film.
Kal-El, no! Kal-El, no!
For what it's worth, despite me not being a fan of Zack Snyder, all things considered, I'm very glad that he at least got to release his version of what he wanted the film to be, and I'm glad that his fans got the movie that they wanted as well. Now, for the sake of this video not being too long, I don't necessarily think it's worth discussing the solo Aquaman film, James Gunn's Suicide Squad film, Birds of Prey, or even Shazam, as they all sort of feel like separate solo stories that weren't really connected to the DCEU post-Justice League. If you want my quick thoughts, Aquaman is meh, I really enjoy Gunn's Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey is mildly entertaining at times, and I think Shazam 1 was really good, but I never saw the sequel. With that out of the way, there's one film left I want to discuss, The Flash. Because The Flash is the final nail in the coffin, as well as another prime example of why the DCEU failed, and if you know what I'm about to say it with me, they rushed the story. The Flash solo film is one that I wasn't exactly looking forward to, which really hurts because if you don't know, the Flash is my favorite DC character. I love Flash comics, I love Flash in the animated shows and movies, and still to this day, I don't think this character has been done justice in live action. We have several good Batman movies, some good Superman movies, some good Spider-Man movies, hell, we have a good movie, 3 of them actually, where 2 of the characters are a talking raccoon and a tree that says the same 3 fucking words. But you're telling me we don't have a single good Flash in a movie? Even in the CW show, it just always feels off. The Flash deserves to be on the big screen and to be done justice. No pun intended. However, in line with the mess that is the DCEU, the studio decided for the first ever Flash solo film, the first time we ever truly meet this character and get to know him, and they decided, yeah, the Flashpoint storyline is the move. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Flashpoint storyline has Barry Allen ending up in a different timeline. In the comics and absolutely stellar animated Flashpoint Paradox film, this new timeline has Barry's mom alive, Thomas Wayne as Batman, Martha Wayne as the Joker, no Superman, and in this timeline, after an affair gone wrong, Aquaman and his Atlanteans are at war with Diana Prince and the Amazonians. Sounds like a lot of material for the first ever solo Flash movie, right? If you said yes, you're correct. The Flashpoint storyline is a great story, but also should in no way be the first solo Flash story. And the film does a weird adaptation variation of it that misses a lot of the key elements that make the animated film and the comic book so great. The film doesn't contain Reverse Flash, who's a massive part of the story. Instead of Thomas Wayne Batman, we get Michael Keaton's version of Batman, and we also get Supergirl instead of Superman, which, listen, I'm fine making changes. I am never someone who thinks that you cannot make changes to a comic or graphic novel if you are adapting something. The word adapt is literally in the word adaptation, and you are adapting something. You're not recreating it, you're making a different version of something with similar attributes and similar qualities. However, you completely stripped away everything that made the comic and animated film work with the Flashpoint storyline to the point where I wouldn't even call this the Flashpoint storyline because it is so different. And like I said, the film doesn't even contain Reverse Flash, who is a massive part of the original story. I honestly think that there's so many different villains and Flash storylines that you could pull from and mix up and mash together. Instead, we get the most iconic and large-scale Flash story, because that's what this DCEU is and has always been about. Being as loud, bombastic, and in your face as possible without doing any of the hard work. They want you to be excited to see Justice League movies and Flashpoint films, but they don't want to do any of the legwork to actually get you excited. They want all the glory and fame without putting in the sweat to get you there. The DCEU from the get-go was a rush job to try and catch up to Marvel. I understand the need to want to get to the big stuff, the Avengers level films, but the Avengers worked because Marvel put in the time, they put in the effort, they had a plan that was laid out on how to put these pieces together. The DCEU always felt like someone threw away the architect's schematics and just started building the house with no floor plans, no structural plans, nothing. It's like closing your eyes, walking into traffic, and praying that you don't get hit. The worst part about it is that, at the end of the day, we as the fans are the ones who suffered the most. People feel really bad for Henry Cavill. I like Henry Cavill. He's a millionaire. He'll be okay. There will be other roles. But as fans of superheroes and DC Comics and these characters, it has felt like nothing but disappointment after disappointment. The MCU was able to bring together people, to bring fans of movies and comics together, and seeing Endgame in theaters was a cultural event. Everyone you knew was going to see this movie to see how the saga ended. The DCEU has done nothing but divide fans. Snyderverse fans want it continued, the rest of the fans want something different. And I'm hoping with the upcoming James Gunn-led DCU that we get more thoughtful and accurate portrayals of these characters. Give me a wise, mature Batman, not angry and violent. Give me a hopeful Superman, not brooding and mopey. Give me a strong, powerful, commanding Wonder Woman, not just charming and doe-eyed. For the love of God, just have a plan. Have an overarching story that you build to. I'm not beyond the belief that a Justice League film could be every bit as popular and successful as any of the Avengers films given the time and work is put in. And if you're a Snyder fan who is still watching, I beg, nay implore you to give James Gunn a chance. I know you liked Snyder's darker version. I know you liked Cavill's Superman, and I know you liked Batfleck, and I'm sorry your universe ended. But this is a fresh start, and Gunn has a proven track record of success. And if given a chance, maybe he can give us a Superman, nay, a DCU that brings fans together instead of dividing us. Well guys, that is it for today's video. I hope this wasn't too negative. I tried to keep it from that, but I just kind of wanted to take a look at the DCEU, why it failed, and the reasons that I think it was not successful. If you did like the video, make sure to click the like button. Let me know what you thought of the videos down in the comments down below. What did you think of the Snyderverse? Are you a Snyder fan? Do you feel that it should have continued? Are you someone who you're a fan, but you think that it was right that they ended it and they are rebooting it? Either way, guys, I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, if you're not subscribed already, make sure to subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more from me. Also, guys, I have a horror movie podcast. We release episodes every Monday. It is titled Scared Speechless. You can find us over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we are also on YouTube now. Every week, we talk about a different horror film. Currently, I think we're in the midst of doing the Insidious films leading up to the 5th Insidious film, The Red Door, which is coming out soon. And yeah, so check us out over there if you guys like horror films. The episodes are about 30 to 40 minutes long. So go on over there and give us a listen. I will leave a link in the description to our YouTube channel down below. It is me and a good friend of mine. Like I said, we just talk about horror films. And with all that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. And as always, also, wait, I did forget. Make sure to click that little bell notification too, so that you get notified when I post new videos. I do not have a consistent upload schedule. Sometimes I upload a video every other day. Sometimes it takes me a week to put out a video. It really depends on the content. But that being said, click that little bell so you get notified when I do post new content. And as always, guys, I will see you on the next video.
Now just envisioning what the Insidious movies would be like if it was Will Arnett in place of can someone do a deep fake of that for me and deep fake Will Arnett's face and voice into Insidious 1 and 2 especially 2. I need to see like the creepy Will Arnett.